5 Live Formula One.
F1's return to China has been full on since practice on Friday. The first of the sprint events this year, 2. So 1 sprint qualifying, 1 sprint race and 1 Grand Prix qualifying down. All that's left is Sunday's race. So now seems like a good time to look back on everything so far. Joining myself, Harry Benjamin, is McLaren Formula E driver Sam Bird and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. Sam, I think we've got to start with the man at the top. Max Verstappen won the sprint race, has also taken pole position for Sunday's Grand Prix. The man is clean and clinical every time, because in the sprint he did have to make a few moves to get into that P1 position.
He did, but he was absolutely dominant when he got into the lead. When he overtook Lewis Hamilton, he then pulled over 13 seconds, Harry. 13 seconds in 9 laps. It's worrying for the rest of the grid for tomorrow.
Well, and then he followed it up with a pole position that never really looked in doubt, did it, Andrew? And that makes it Red Bull's 100th pole position in Formula One. And it's a lockout with Perez P2 on the grid.
Imperious is the word I chose for my report, Harry. And I think actually, do you know, I hate to say this, but it's almost looking even more dominant than last year and the year before. His average qualifying gap, Red Bull's to anyone else's, I should say, so far this season is bigger than it has been so far in 2022 and 2023. It just looks so easy for Verstappen. In the sprint race, you know, he controlled his tyres in the first few laps, and then he sort of came at Alonso and Hamilton, and it looked like it went past him like a knife through butter. And in qualifying, he's on another level, and the other drivers are referring to it in that way. They're all talking about finishing third. You know, Charles Leclerc talking about getting to third. Lando Norris talking about battling with the Ferraris, but probably not being able to beat them. Everyone's just given up. It's just Verstappen and Red Bull all the way.
Well, let's hear from the imperious Max Verstappen now, speaking after qualifying.
Yeah, I think in general the whole qualifying, it went really well. A few changes that we made to the car definitely made it a bit nicer to drive for me. And then Q3, of course, you go all out and you really try to put the best lap out there. And it felt good. It was with the wind, it was quite tricky today in some places to be very consistent. But overall in Q3, I think with the gap that we had to the cars behind, we definitely can't complain.
How are you feeling about tomorrow? All you've got, I guess, is the data that you really got from this morning. It's a long afternoon. What you're expecting?
Yeah, I mean, we should be quick normally, but I also know that after a sprint, a lot of people can analyze more what they are doing, what we are doing. So naturally, I think the gaps will become a bit smaller. But I'm still very confident, of course, that we can have a good race.
Is this the how would you phrase it? The worst domination or the most dominated Formula One has ever been in history?
No, but it's up there. So this is, for me, it's reminiscent of the Schumacher Ferrari years of 2002 and 2004, when it was the best driver in the best car with a teammate in Rubens Barrichello who wasn't quite at his level, and basically he won. He was going to win pretty much every race unless something went wrong. That's what happened in those 2 years. The difference in those years was that there was a tyre war, and the other teams would sometimes pop up when their tyres were good enough or better enough than the tyres that the Ferrari had to bridge the gap between the cars. That can't happen anymore because everyone's got Pirelli. So when you've got a situation where a car is that much clear of the rest and one driver in that car is that much clear of the other driver, it's no surprise he wins every race. That's just the way it is.
But it's not his fault that it's this monotonous, let's call it, at the front of Formula One. He's just doing the best job. I mean, he is a sensational talent, so fast. He's given the best car. He's also given the best car that suits his style perfectly. Doesn't necessarily suit Sergio Perez as well. Perez prefers a slightly understeery car. Max really likes the car on a knife edge. And he's driving at his absolute peak.
Yeah, we're talking about, to address your question about domination, you're talking about the Schumacher years that I mentioned. You've got Jim Clark in the Lotus in the mid-60s, 63 and 65, when he won his 2 championships. He was in a completely other league than everyone else. Alberto Ascari in the Ferrari in 1952 and 1953. But that's about it. Because in most of the other eras of domination, the 2 drivers in the best car have been reasonably comparable. So the Mercedes era in 2014 to 16, the reliability skewed it in Rosberg's favour, which was why he was able to take the championship fight to Hamilton in 14 and 16. Otherwise, it would have gone like it did in 15 with Hamilton dominating. The McLaren era with Senna and Prost in 88 and 89, they were pretty close as drivers, particularly in race pace. The Williams era with Mansell and Piquet in the late 80s, again, pretty close as drivers. You don't often find it, thankfully, for those of us who are watching an impartial and wanting to see a sporting entertainment, you don't often see one car with so much superiority, with one driver with so much superiority within that team. But that's where we are right now.
And he becomes the first driver in the 21st century to take pole in the first 5 races of the season. So you cannot fault the man in any kind of regard. It's just a saying, we want that jeopardy. And that is what makes us and the viewers and the listeners around the world engage more with Formula One. Ultimately, none of us care who takes pole or who wins. We just want it to be a fight all the way to the flag. I suppose, though, in the sprints, he wasn't on pole, funnily enough. And Sam, that all stems back to, if we can cast our minds back to sprint qualifying on the Friday, which was a bit chaotic because not only are the track conditions in the dry a little bit sketchy in terms of grip, suddenly we had rain come in as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, if the drivers thought that it was tricky to execute a perfect lap in the dry, in the wet, it looked absolutely, at times it looked undrivable to keep the car on the grey stuff. Everybody was struggling for grip. Everybody was struggling to keep surface temperature in those tyres. The people that did stay on the track really benefited. There were also a lot of track limit issues in this qualifying session for the sprint. We actually saw Lando Norris claim pole position, have his lap time taken away, and then, just common sense prevailed and they reinstated his lap because there was no way he gained an advantage when bouncing through the gravel.
No, and in the end, it ended up being Norris on pole for the sprint alongside Lewis Hamilton. It all went pear-shaped, though, Andrew, quite quickly for Lando Norris, edged out wide coming into turn 1. Do you think Norris could have done more to not lose so many positions in that skirmish with Andrew? Well, with Lewis.
Yeah, well, Hamilton certainly did. In his interview, he said that he should have given it up because what happened was that Hamilton got a better start. He got alongside Norris pretty early on down the straight, and he was on the inside. But what happened was Norris tried to hang it out and keep it going. And you could see what he was thinking, because that first corner, it's a right-hander, and it goes on forever and ever and ever. It almost comes a full 360. But then the next corner is a left. So Norris will be thinking, well, if I can just keep it here, relatively side by side with Hamilton, I've got the inside line for the left-hander. But he didn't get that far. It's a bit more slippery out there on the left-hand side. The track's not got that much grip anyway, and he basically lost it and slid off the track and lost 6 places, and that was the end of his chances of a decent place in the sprint. And he's not qualified on pole for the Grand Prix, but he's done a very good job to be 4th. So I think he will regret that. It's a bit of a recurring theme for Norris. He's very self-critical, a bit like Charles Leclerc. They don't try and hide behind anything. They front up when they make mistakes. But it does keep happening for Norris, and he probably needs to have a little sit down with himself and think about why does it keep happening like that.
Well, this is the thing, right, Sam? I mean, you're racing with McLaren in Formula E, and I know there's pressure on drivers all the time, but you've had pressure in terms of, getting back onto the podium, getting another race win under your belt. the pressure on Lando Norris to get that first win, even if it is a sprint win. His teammates got one. He hasn't. We all know the last time he had a chance to win back in Russia a couple of years ago, he let it slip in quite dramatic fashion with the rain coming down. Will this pressure cripple Lando Norris at the end of the day? Will he be able to get through it?
Of course he'll be able to get through it. Of course he will. Yes, it's difficult, and these top athletes, they may be working with some form of mind coach that will help relieve that pressure and that stress and give him like coping mechanisms or things to help him when it comes to getting nervous. Okay, he's made a mistake today and he was going for it round the outside. Will he do that tomorrow? No, he won't. I mean, the mistake was he didn't get the overlap on Lewis. There wasn't enough of an overlap to even consider it. And then also he's had a little lift, then he's gone back on throttle and then had to brake. And with that constant pitching of the car and the fact that it's low grip, that's what's caused the oversteer. Lando's one of the best drivers in the world. He'll be absolutely fine. He will win races. It's not a case of if, it's when. Do McLaren currently have a car that can fight the Red Bull on a regular occasion? No, but McLaren are trending in the right direction.
And I suppose in the chaotic rain conditions that we saw Lando Norris go fastest, those conditions kind of showcase a driver's true ability, because it almost levels it out a little bit, and it's the driver who can get to the flag and still get that lap in. And Norris was right up there, along with Hamilton, along with Alonso.
Well, not just right up there, Harry. He was
ahead of him.
He was more than a second clear of everybody else, Norris. As Sam says, he's a fantastic racing driver. And of course he'll be fine. It's just that, he won't want to be in this situation where he's making these tiny little errors when he gets a chance of something. As it happens, I don't think it really made that much difference today. Okay, so maybe he might have finished second in the sprint to Verstappen instead of finishing where he did, but he wasn't going to beat Verstappen today. It doesn't look like anyone's going to beat Verstappen this weekend or for any time in the foreseeable future, for that matter. So he can. It's not a bad time to be learning how not to get yourself in these situations. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Lando Norris ended the sprint race in sixth. Just ahead of him, though, was a tremendous battle, Sam, in the sprint race for third place, ultimately, between Perez, Leclerc, Sainz and Alonso. Alonso was holding on to that third place for so long until contact ultimately ended him with a puncture and he had to retire. Perez ended up taking the P3 slot. But just focusing on Alonso for a moment, that car is not the best car, clearly. And you look at the disparity between Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll in that team. Is the car okay, and this is Alonso's talent rising above, or is it something else? How good is Fernando Alonso as a driver? I know that seems like such a basic question to ask, but this just underlines it time and time again. The oldest driver on the grid is going to be here till 2026 at the very least, and with no signs
2036. I mean, he could
no
carry
signs
on
of stopping.
He's one of the best over the last 2 decades, without question. You'd have to say that Fernando, Lewis, and Max is joining them obviously, and right there with them. But those are probably the best 3 over the last 15-20 years. He's able to do things with a car that his teammates simply can't. In this case, it's obviously Lance Stroll who's having a torrid time being Fernando's teammate. But what he did so well today is he got into second and made it so difficult for the chasing pack to chase him down. Now, that car isn't the quickest and it's not the best on its tyres, but he was able to hold on for as long as he did was remarkable. Okay, he's come away with a retirement and 3 penalty points on his licence for trying to chuck it down the inside of Carlos Sainz, but I love the fact that he's still racy. I love that.
What did you think of that penalty, Sam? Do you think he deserved a penalty for that incident?
Well, he was the one that had to retire, and he was the one that got a puncture. So I thought it was a little bit harsh.
Yeah, I thought the same. So, look, the thing about the Aston Martin, it is quicker over 1 lap, as Sam says, than it is over a race distance. And it had an upgrade in Suzuka 2 weeks ago. And quite often with upgrades, you find that teams put them on and maybe it improves the car a little bit in the first race. But then once they see the data and they get to learn to analyze it a bit and they can see, oh, this is going to help us in this way or that way, they can play with the setup a bit more, and then they get the improvements come a little bit after the first introduction of the upgrade. And this is the second race. They've had 2 weeks to think about it. So we may be seeing some of that as well. But Sam's absolutely right. He's not just one of the best drivers, or one of the three best drivers for the last 20 years. He's one of the best drivers Formula One's ever seen. And he's setting new standards in terms of age. You know, it's not that long ago, people thought Formula One drivers were basically washed up by the time they got to their mid to late 30s. He's still performing at a level beyond almost anyone else on the grid at 42, trending towards 43 in July, be 45 by the time of his Aston Martin contract. I think, you know, a little bit more attention perhaps should be paid. He hates it. He doesn't like his age to be brought up, Alonso. He says it's just a number. It's all about dedication and determination. And of course that's true. But I think still to be doing what he's doing at that age, that still having the drive and commitment that enables him to do this, because we've seen both sides of Alonso today. We've seen the great racecraft and he's put it third on the grid ahead of the McLarens and the Ferraris. It's really something else.
Constantly setting new benchmarks is Fernando Alonso in that respect. You mentioned there, Andrew, he did indeed qualify third for the Grand Prix. Let's hear from him.
Extremely happy. I mean, I was P3 yesterday on the wet in Q3, and I thought it was just special circumstances that put us in P3, but today on a completely dry qualifying, we still P3. So, yeah, qualifying, we are very strong, as we have been all throughout the season. Race pace, we're still not good. We saw this morning that we were holding a group of cars behind, so we need to improve that. But it's one step at a time. Happy with today's performance. Let's hope for a strong race tomorrow.
Do you still feel like you can be in the mix tomorrow? Because like today you had your elbows, like you could pit tomorrow at least. They kind of do something with the strategy, can't you?
I mean, we will do our best. I think we are not the easiest opponent for everybody else. So let's put it that way. We will try to push and have a strong race, but I think it will be very difficult to hold the two Ferraris and the two McLarens behind 57 laps. It's going to be an extremely long race for us to hold those positions. So if it's P7, P8 tomorrow afternoon, when I'm here talking to you, I will still happy with the overall weekend.
That's Fernando Alonso speaking after qualifying third on the grid behind Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen, who will start Sunday's Grand Prix from pole position. Still to come, we'll be talking about Lewis Hamilton's up and down day in China and the battle between McLaren and Ferrari. A day is a long time in Formula One and things can change quite quickly. A contrasting day for Lewis Hamilton, who we were just talking about a few moments ago as one of the greats on the grid and of all time in Formula One. Brilliant start for the sprint race. Qualified on the front row, was leading the race for a long time, ended up finishing in second. However, Sam, tough qualifying for the Grand Prix. Will start down in 18th.
Yeah, and it's not a true reflection of his pace or the cars. He had a huge lockup at the end of the long straight going into the hairpin. That's been an area where a lot of cars have struggled with retardation on the brakes and also snatching front right tyres. He's had a lockup there. He's lost what we think is about half a second to 0.6. That would have put him P5, P6 in Q1, comfortably through to Q2. So he was there or thereabouts with regards to pace with where we thought he would be, but that mistake has absolutely been super costly.
So, Andrew, without that mistake then, this is a general improvement for Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes.
It's hard to know, isn't it? Because it's all if, you know. We don't know. He would have, I think Sam's right, he would have got through without that mistake into Q2. Where would he have ended up in Q2? He has looked a bit quicker than George Russell this weekend. Russell's qualified down in 8th, so maybe Hamilton could have been 6th or 7th, which I guess would have been an improvement on his level, but it's still his level so far this season, I should say. But it's still not in a great place for Mercedes generally. They're still, not fully understanding why the car isn't doing what they expect it should be doing in terms of performance. So I think it'd be wrong to make too many conclusions about them this weekend, other than to say 18th is not an on-merit qualifying performance. And let's be clear about, his performance in the sprint was very strong.
Absolutely was.
He led for a lot of it. He got passed by Verstappen, but he was well clear of Alonso. The others didn't catch him. Perez thought if he'd maybe cleared the others behind him earlier, he might have had a go at catching Hamilton. But still, to keep a Mercedes in second place for 19 laps is quite an achievement. He was talking about making setup changes before qualifying, and he was implying as if he'd outthought himself because he said it made the car worse, but it doesn't look like it made it that much worse. It just made it look like looks like it was where it was, and basically the car needs an upgrade. The bigger question about Mercedes at the moment is, do they know what that upgrade should be?
Yeah, we've been saying for the last couple of races, Mercedes just seem a little bit lost at the moment. But let's hear what Lewis Hamilton had to say after qualifying.
Yeah, I should have got through easy. It was my mistake. I just struggled. I couldn't seem to stop the car in turn 14. I think just kept locking. Maybe needed one more lap.
Can you take some confidence in the way the car felt this morning on that soft tyre into the race tomorrow? There's a few unknowns.
The car is massively different. We changed a lot. But yeah, I'm hoping tomorrow's going to be a bit better. I hope it rains tomorrow now. I need the rain, so the rain dance, I need everyone to do it.
Lewis Hamilton then qualifying for the Chinese Grand Prix in 18th. His teammate George Russell up in 8th. Russell is just behind the two Ferraris of Leclerc and Sainz, who are 6th and 7th, and they are just behind the two McLarens of Norris and Piastri. Andrew, we didn't quite expect this coming into the weekend. On paper, we all thought, well, Ferrari are the second fastest team at the moment. McLaren came into this weekend on the back foot. They said they wouldn't go well here, yet it hasn't come to be in qualifying.
So it looks as if what's happened is that this is a function of China being tough on tyres, basically. Leclerc was saying after qualifying that he's set the car up primarily for the race. He didn't expect to be beaten by the McLarens as a result, or by Alonso, but he did. He was, but he says he's pretty confident of coming back through to third. So effectively, sounds like he's set the car up with a bit of understeer for qualifying, because what happens in races is as the rear tyres go off, the car trends towards oversteer, and you don't want that in a race, because if you start getting oversteer, you start spinning the tyres, then the tyres overheat, then you get too short, and your race can spiral out of control. So you want to keep all that sort of stuff under control, but understeer, by contrast, is bad for qualifying, because you don't get the motion from the car as you're going into the corner. You can't control it as well, and he hates understeer as a driver anyway, Charles Leclerc. So that's what's happened. He's ended up further back than he expected, but not just him was saying that. Also, Lando Norris was saying he was expecting the Ferraris to come back past them in the race.
I definitely think the Ferrari have got the edge on McLaren in race trim, but it was very interesting to see McLaren taking it to Ferrari today. I completely agree that I think it's something to do with the tyre. This track and this track surface, what they've done here, it was always difficult before, but now it's not giving you the best grip. Yet because you're spending quite a lot of time sliding and there's a lot of prolonged corners, you tend to overheat the surfaces. So that's something to look out for in tomorrow's race as well. Who can keep the tyre in the right window thermally, and also not suffer with too much deg? That's something that Ferrari have got better at. I think they probably have the edge on McLaren in the course of a race with regards to degradation, but I don't see anybody catching the Red Bulls.
One of the patterns this year so far actually has been how mixed up qualifying has tended to be behind Verstappen, but also how much the races have then devolved into car order. So you might find that, a McLaren qualifies second, or an Aston Martin qualifies fourth, or a Mercedes can get up into the top four sometimes. But in the race, the natural car order is Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, and then Mercedes or Aston Martin. And the drivers have been saying that after every race, because that's what's happened after every race. And now people like Leclerc and Norris are saying it even before the race. Basically, Formula One's in a kind of state of stasis at the moment, waiting for each team to have its next big upgrade. both Ferrari and McLaren are talking about having a big upgrade coming soonish that they're both hoping will make a reasonably significant difference to their performance level. Of course, it's all relative, because if everyone's improving at the same rate, it might not change anything. But McLaren, for example, have talked about specific characteristics of their car that they hope that this upgrade will sort out. Ferrari are talking about an upgrade that they hope will get them into a position where they can compete much more closely with Red Bull. Not soon enough, they don't think, to have a difference in the championship, but enough to have a difference through the rest of the season. But those upgrades haven't come yet, and we don't know yet when they're coming. So it's a question of kind of like wait and see for everybody. And in the meantime, the race is finished: Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, and that's it.
I'm when you're talking about sort of Ferrari versus McLaren with regards to the upgrades, I quite fancy McLaren doing maybe a slightly better job. And the reason why is that I feel like last year, if you take last year, for example, McLaren had a clear view on where they needed to take their car. And they had a very methodical approach. When they brought upgrades, they worked. When Ferrari tend to bring upgrades, I feel like it's a little bit more scattered, and they don't always necessarily improve the car or make the improvements that they want. So if Ferrari are coming into it saying, we want to get closer to Red Bull, and you've got Andrea Stella saying, we know the areas where we want to improve. We're going to target those areas to improve our race car. I know which one of those two I prefer.
Just a couple of things to say about this. One is Sam Bird is employed by McLaren as a racing driver.
There is no impartiality at all. Don't know what you do. I remember I used
Freudian slip. There's no impartiality at all.
I used to look. I'm also a big Ferrari fan. I used to be a works Ferrari driver. I'm just saying that I think that last year McLaren worked in a very clever way to get a car that was at the back of the grid towards the front of the grid and getting multiple podiums. If that's anything to go by, their next upgrade should be a step forwards and could take them to more consistent podiums.
Yeah, so the point two that I was going to make was Sam's absolutely right. In the course of the last calendar year, no question McLaren have improved more than any other Formula One team, particularly with that big upgrade that Sam's talking about, which started in the Austrian Grand Prix last summer. But the third thing to say about it is that while what Sam's saying overall about McLaren and Ferrari over the last year is true, actually, if you take a snapshot from around about sort of Zandvoort, Italy time last year, Ferrari did make a significant step with their upgrade in Japan, if you remember last year. And from that moment on, they've also been true to their word about development. That upgrade fixed the instability in the car to a large degree, and that's why we saw Charles Leclerc's performances improve so much, for example, in the last third of last year when he had that really strong run of qualifying performances. And they very nearly pipped Mercedes to second in the constructors as a result of that improvement. And they set out with a target for this year's car, which they have absolutely achieved. Now, it's a smaller timeline for Ferrari, so you have to be a little bit more sceptical, but you have to say that Fred Vasseur, the team principal, has done a good job in getting that team pointed in the right direction, apparently, in quite a lot of different areas, including race strategy and operational management generally. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that battle plays out over the rest of the season. It's probably, in the absence of a championship fight, because there isn't one, it's probably the most interesting aspect of the rest of the season, actually.
Yeah, well, just to reiterate where those drivers qualified for the Grand Prix: Norris 4th, Piastri 5th, Leclerc 6th, ahead of Sainz in 7th. And just to sort of finish off this point, if we hone in on the Ferraris a little bit, Leclerc ahead of Sainz, whereas for most of the season, actually, Sainz seems like he's had the upper hand. Leclerc, is he approaching this weekend a little bit differently?
So a couple of things to say there. First of all, Sainz made his own life a bit difficult by crashing in Q2.
There was also that, yeah.
It doesn't appear that he damaged the car, though, and there's just hundredths between them in the end on pace. But also, the natural order at Ferrari is Leclerc slightly quicker than Sainz. You know, as their period over the last 3 years as teammates, Leclerc's average qualifying advantage over Sainz is about 0.15 to 0.2, basically, over that whole period. He's the quicker driver as a default. Hasn't been the case this year. He's been talking about it a lot. He's been talking about tyre preparation. He thinks he's beginning to get on top of that, and he has looked much more competitive this weekend. And he says it's not a finished job yet, but he can feel himself going in the right direction. So, and he sounded very confident about the next race in Miami, probably partly because it's a street circuit and he's so good around street circuits, but also because I think he feels he knows what went wrong in those first couple of races, or the last two races rather, in Australia and Japan, for Sainz to be ahead of him. He understands too that that's the natural order of things. And actually, I think if Carlos Sainz was honest with himself, which he usually is, he would also say that that's the natural order. Leclerc is the quicker over a lap. So it's no surprise to see him quicker over a lap this weekend.
No, and it's not like we're talking 2, 3, 4 tenths. We're talking a couple of hundreds. I mean, there's nothing to separate them. So when Leclerc was uber confident with the race car, getting pole positions, he'd have that gap. He'd have 3, 4 tenths perhaps on Carlos Sainz. Carlos has upped his game. He's in the shop window of a lot of teams at the moment. We think we know where he might go, but nothing's signed yet. But it's very, very close. There's still more to come, I think, from Charles Leclerc in this Ferrari.
We mentioned that Sainz obviously had the crash which brought out the red flag in Q2. He was able to get back out there with seemingly very minimal damage, had to have a front wing change. But how much of that was luck and how much was driver skill to play with the way he crashed?
So a lot of these drivers and a lot of the top drivers will manipulate their car while spinning, knowing what to do with their feet and the steering wheel in order to minimize damage or at least get you pointing kind of in the right direction. Carlos Sainz has come out and said that he's deliberately manipulated his car while kind of going sideways stroke backwards to hit sideways on the tyres, or try and hit sideways and avoid the rear wing. So the rear wing would be a big job, not something that you could probably do in a 5-minute red flag. Front wing and a side impact on the tyres is a 1-minute change of tyres and a new front wing. So if he has done that, he's done it very well. But also he was a lucky boy to escape floor damage, the front strakes, loads of things that could have fallen off and got damaged. He was lucky. And
Ferrari doing a good job of cleaning the car up, getting ready to send him out in the final parts of Q2. And of course, he made it through, ended up qualifying in 7th, ahead of George Russell in 8th. The top 10 rounded out by Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas and Valtteri Bottas in the Sauber. Sam, your man, if you didn't hear the coverage of qualifying, that was Sam's prediction. Valtteri Bottas into Q3. Didn't he do well?
He did do well. Thank you, Valtteri. Thank you.
But that's a really encouraging sign for him, which it's been a tough start for Sauber on the track and in the pit lane.
I would say that on the track, okay, it hasn't been brilliant, but it hasn't been utterly woeful. I mean, I would put them on pace generally above Alpine, who've actually had a better day today, believe it or not, on the whole. But it's been the pit stops. An area where there are teams taking sub 2 seconds for pit stops. Unfortunately, because of issues, they're taking sometimes 30 seconds. It's a problem.
It certainly is, and he'll be desperate to get some points on the board. Will Valtteri Bottas come the end of 56 laps of the Chinese Grand Prix? We'll wrap things up there. Shall we get you predicted so well a Bottas top 10. How about a prediction for the race? It doesn't have to be Bottas, anything, bar the race winner.
No, we've got to do the race winner as well. That's why people listen into this. They want to know who we think is. So my race winner, shock horror, is Max Verstappen. Second place is going to be Sergio Perez. Third place, I'm going to say Charles Leclerc.
Okay, and where's Bottas going to end?
He's going to not be on the podium, which is a shame. I'm going to say I can't see him scoring points. But I'm going to be bold and somehow say that Alpine are going to score 1 point.
Wow. Okay.
I know. I'm throwing it out there.
A point for Alpine is
Andrew Benson's not.
Prediction.
He's sort of looking at me like, what am I talking about?
Andrew, come on, we better get your 1, 2, 3 and then a bold prediction on top of that.
Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc as well.
Oh, don't be boring and do the same as me.
That's what I think, Sam.
Okay, fine.
I'm sorry. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm all out of bold predictions already in 2024 Formula One. We're only on race
We haven't even
5.
had the fifth race
Yeah,
yet.
exactly.
Come on.
How about Hamilton to get into the points?
From 18th.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. We'll accept that one. Yeah, fair enough. I'm going to go for a Verstappen win. I reckon Leclerc will finish second, Perez third. So I'll go slightly different with you there. And my bold prediction will be Ricciardo for a top 7 finish.
Whoa.
I know, I've just plucked that out of
Top 7?
absolutely
Why
nowhere.
top 7? I mean,
just to make it harder for myself.
Oh my God.
Yeah, absolutely nowhere. We'll end it there then, shall we? Let's see what happens. You can hear the Grand Prix live coverage Sunday on BBC Radio 5 Live. We'll be on air from 7:45 in the morning UK time. Lights out from 8 o'clock. My thanks to Andrew Benson, to Sam Bird. We'll see you for Lights Out for the Chinese Grand Prix. Max Verstappen starts on pole position. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.